Meanwhile, it is president versus former president in a war of words as we are inching closer to the November midterm elections. Former President Donald Trump speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania last night, and the first thing he did was hit back at President Biden. And Biden, of course, in a primetime address on Thursday, warning about the threat that he says MAGA Republicans are posing to American democracy. Trump now calling President Biden an enemy of the state who, quote, looked like the devil. Now, Washington correspondent Tom Dempsey live for us. Tom, what is the latest on this war of words?
Hey, Natasha. Yeah, this battle between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump continues to heat up, with both taking shots at one another this week, as a possible rematch between the two in 2024 still remains possible.
On Saturday night, former President Donald Trump took direct aim at President Joe Biden during a rally in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
He thinks making America great again is a threat to our country. No, making America great again is great for our country.
The stop in Pennsylvania came just 2 days after President Biden also came to the state for a primetime address in Philadelphia. With both men possibly facing off in a presidential rematch in 2024, the two nearly echoed one another when focusing on the threat from the other side.
The danger to democracy comes from the radical left, not from the right.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
The war of words comes as a recent Quinnipiac poll found 67% of Americans believe democracy to be in danger of collapse, up nearly 10% from January. Now, as midterms get closer and control of Congress remains at stake, things could heat up even more.
There's only one party that's waging war on American democracy.
But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. And that is a threat to this country.
President Joe Biden plans to travel to both Milwaukee and Pittsburgh for Labor Day. And earlier today, we learned that Senate candidate in Pennsylvania, John Fetterman, will be joining the president for that gathering in Pittsburgh. Natasha?
Yeah, and Tom, speaking of Pennsylvania, you know, the battle between Senate candidates Dr. Oz and John Fetterman getting nastier. Just last night, Trump accused Fetterman of being a drug user.
Yeah, absolutely. He made those comments during that rally in Wilkes-Barre. Again, that race really just getting nastier and nastier. It's spread to TV ads and social media, with the two sides exchanging barbs at one another. Another battleground state we're watching, though, right now, Ohio. Actually, NewsNation station actually spoke to J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate in that race. He's facing Democrat Tim Ryan. The polls are very close right now. And in an exclusive interview with the NewsNation station, J.D. Vance spoke about the significance of that race in particular.
I instinctively mistrust polls, especially at this stage. I don't think they're anything more than, at best, a snapshot of the race. But I think the choice for Ohio voters is so clear. You have a guy who's been very anti-police, very pro inflationary policies, and you have an alternative, and I'm the alternative.
We were just speaking about how close that race is in the polls right now. Decision Desk HQ has the race with Vance ahead 1.9 percentage points. Again, neck and neck in the polls. Going to be exciting to see what happens on Election Day, just over 2 months away at this point. Natasha?
Oh, absolutely. Tom Dempsey live for us in D.C. Thank you. We do want to stick within the political landscape. I want to bring in Niall Stanich, reporter with our partners at The Hill. Niall, great to see you as always.
Great to see you, Natasha.
Let's dive a little deeper into this Trump versus Biden narrative. You know, we're seeing Trump on the campaign trail last night, his first appearance since the Mar-a-Lago raid, and just days after Biden gave his primetime speech as well. And Trump calling Biden's speech vicious, hateful, and divisive. Biden says that MAGA ideology is semi-fascism. In your eyes, who is winning the messaging war at this point?
It's difficult to say definitively. Now, it seems from the most recent polls that President Biden is favored in hypothetical matchups for 2024 in more polls than former President Trump is, but it's really too close, certainly this far out, to say anything definitive about that. Right now, I think we see both men playing to their respective bases with these comments. Certainly when we see, for example, former President Trump describe President Biden as an enemy of the state. I mean, that's a fairly remarkable statement. I think it's interesting, Natasha. I mean, we seem to have almost become used to these kind of phrases, whereas, 10 years ago, if Mitt Romney had called President Obama an enemy of the state, there would have been uproar. So it's curious the way language has become so inflammatory these days.
Yeah, and for one person in particular, absolutely, Niall. In the speech last night, Trump called out Biden, and we saw him, he called out Hillary and her email server. He talked about Adam Schiff and Russia, and a lot of things that are, frankly, not new talking points. Do you think voters in 2022 outside of his hardcore base care about Hillary's emails or his repeated allegations of election fraud at this point? Do they care about these issues?
Not outside of his base, and I think that was an important point you made in your question. Those comments can certainly excite the Trump base, and they can perhaps help to get those people to the polls in November when the former president isn't himself on the ballot. But, independent voters, unaligned voters, voters who are considering whom to vote for in November, I would be amazed if they are overly bothered one way or another about what former President Trump has to say at this point about events in 2016 or 2017 or 2018. Elections are customarily about the future, and that wasn't something that the former president spent, frankly, a great deal of time talking about in his speech last night.
Well, as following up on that, is Trump just going to be Trump? And is there any concern over the division within the Republican Party and rhetoric like we saw last night potentially alienating more moderate conservatives?
For sure, there is. And it's not just a matter of alienation. It's also about trying to frame these midterm elections in the most beneficial way. And that's what we hear from Trump skeptical Republicans. And I don't just mean never Trumpers there, but people who are in the GOP and concerned that the former president, A, makes things about him, and B, engages in this very heated, belligerent rhetoric all the time. Republicans believe that the overall political landscape still favors them, particularly when you look at a topic like inflation, which remains very, very high by historic standards. They would be quite happy to run on the economy, inflation, crime and immigration to some degree, and a referendum on President Biden's first 2 years. The former president, Mr. Trump, complicates that calculus to a very considerable degree.
And we saw last night, Trump walking right up to the line of announcing potentially. He did stop short. If he does announce, we know it won't give him any protections in the ongoing investigations, but does it politically complicate them in any way?
Yeah, I think it clearly would. You're quite right to note that from a strictly legal perspective, a candidate for the presidency can be investigated or charged if it comes to that, like any other citizen can. But in the real world, in the world of realpolitik, it does change things, because prosecutors have to look at any case that they're thinking about bringing, and they think, well, what climate will this go forward in? Would we have less of a chance of conviction, for example, from a jury, if we are trying this case against a current candidate for office, particularly a candidate who is so sure of trying to turn the whole thing to their own political advantage, as is the case with Mr. Trump.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of News Nation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.